The crash. The sky over Marinor 3 never changed. It hung there like a bruised canvas, painted in eternal twilight shades of purple and gold. The atmosphere was too thin for proper clouds, too cold for anything resembling life. Saul Ren preferred it that way. Out here, beyond the dust-choked ridge of the Great Scar, nobody bothered a man who wanted nothing to do with the rest of the galaxy. His world consisted of three simple things: the crushing silence of space, the skeletal remains of junked starships, and the steady hum of his aging plasma torch as he carved salvage from the bones of the dead. 43 days. That's how long it had been since he'd spoken to another living soul. 43 days of perfect, uninterrupted solitude. Then something fell from the stars. The shock wave hit his shelter like a giant's fist, rattling the reinforced walls and jolting Saul from his sleep. Through the reinforced viewport, he watched a distant pillar of fire and debris paint the horizon in brilliant orange and white. The impact cut through the purple gloom like a dying star bleeding into the atmosphere. Saul blinked hard, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and reached for his jacket. Whatever had come down wasn't listed in the Salvager beacon network. He'd checked the feeds religiously every morning for the past 3 years. No claim meant no bounty hunters. No bounty hunters meant it was his, if he could get there first. The dune crawler's patched engine grumbled to life under his seat, complaining about the cold like an old man's joints. The terrain between his shelter and the crash site was jagged and unforgiving, all broken stone and shifting dust, but Saul had been navigating these wastes for longer than he cared to remember. 2 hours later, as Marinor's pale orange sun finally kissed the black hills on the horizon, he found what had fallen. It wasn't a standard emergency pod. It wasn't even a ship, not in any way he recognized. The thing looked like a splinter torn from some ancient cathedral, long, sharp, and covered in symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly beneath the settling dust. The hull was dark as midnight, and there was no visible door or airlock. Only a jagged breach in the side that still hissed with escaping atmosphere. Saul pulled his rebreather tight and climbed through the wreckage. Inside, the walls were covered in more of those strange symbols, glowing soft blue like bioluminescent algae. Broken consoles sparked fitfully, and the air tasted of ozone and something else, something alive. That's when he saw it. At the heart of the vessel, surrounded by shattered glass and flickering displays, stood a cage made of pure light. Chains of blue energy anchored it to the floor, walls, and ceiling, humming with barely contained power. And inside, curled tight but still breathing, was a creature unlike anything in Saul's 3 decades of life. It was a leopard, but not like any he'd seen in the nature documentaries from Earth. This one was larger, more elegant, with fur that seemed to capture and hold starlight. Its markings weren't the typical rosettes. Instead, pale gold stripes ran through its coat like lightning frozen beneath fresh snow. But something was wrong. The creature's spine was bent at an unnatural angle, its hind legs lying limp and motionless beneath its body. Deep welts marked its flanks where the energy chains held it tight. Its breathing was shallow, labored. This wasn't a cage designed for temporary holding, this was a prison built to last. Then it opened its eyes. They glowed with soft, spectral blue light that seemed to reach right into Saul's soul. The leopard couldn't move, couldn't even lift its head properly, but those eyes found his and held them with an intelligence that made his breath catch. And then, impossibly, a voice whispered inside his mind. "You're not them." Saul stumbled backward, his hand instinctively reaching for the plasma cutter on his belt. The voice came again, weaker this time, tinged with something that might have been hope. "You're alive. Only just, but alive. Who are you?" Saul managed, his voice rough in the thin air. "I am Valin," the voice replied, and somehow Saul could hear the exhaustion in it, the pain of countless cycles spent in this prison of light. "I was a guardian, once. Before they decided I remembered too much." The energy chains pulsed brighter for a moment, as if responding to the creature's thoughts. Valin's body tensed, and a soft whimper escaped his throat. Saul looked at the ancient restraints, at the dying guardian bound in chains of light, at the runes that covered every surface of this floating tomb. He thought about 43 days of silence, about a life spent picking through the bones of the dead, about what it meant to find something beautiful in a universe that seemed determined to grind everything down to dust. Quietly, he said, "Let them come." And he began to work. Breaking the chains. The plasma torch ignited with a sharp hiss, its blue-white flame casting dancing shadows across the chamber walls. Saul studied the first restraint carefully, the energy chain that bound Valin's left foreleg to the floor. The mechanism was ancient, far older than anything in his salvage yard, but the principles were the same. Energy had to flow somewhere. Every system had a weak point. "I'm going to get you out of here," Saul said, adjusting the torch's focus. Valin's mental voice was barely a whisper. "You should not. The ones who caged me, they're still watching. Let them watch." Saul pressed the cutting beam against the chain's anchor point. "I don't like bullies." The moment the plasma touched the restraint, the entire chamber erupted in warning signals. The energy chain flared brilliant white, fighting back with pulses of resistance that tried to deflect the beam, redirect the heat, anything to protect itself. The air filled with the smell of burning metal and ozone. But Saul had spent years cutting through stubborn technology. He was more stubborn. The first shackle burst apart with a sound like breaking bones. Sparks cascaded across the chamber floor, and Valin's body jolted as the sudden release of pressure sent shock waves through his nervous system. He let out a low growl, not of anger, but of relief so profound it made Saul's chest tight. "Can you move it?" Saul asked, nodding toward the freed limb. Valin tried to flex his foreleg. The movement was weak, trembling, but it was movement. "My spine was damaged before they locked me here. I was already paralyzed when the first shackle closed." Saul frowned, understanding dawning. "So this wasn't to hold you physically?" "No. It was to silence me." Valin's eyes dimmed slightly. "I remembered things I wasn't supposed to. Names. Places. What they did to my people." The second restraint was more complex, equipped with a secondary failsafe, a neural pulse emitter designed to shock the captive if anyone tried to tamper with the chains. Saul pulled a signal dampener from his belt and slapped it against the emitter's core. The device whined and died, and the shackle split moments later. "You're not just a salvager," Valin observed, his mental voice stronger now. Saul gave a bitter smile as he moved to the third chain. "I'm just a man who doesn't like seeing something beautiful left to rot." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the plasma torch and the soft sparking of damaged systems. Then, for the first time since Saul had found him, Valin blinked slowly, a gesture that somehow conveyed more gratitude than words ever could. "Beautiful," he repeated softly. "I had forgotten that word." "Yeah, well." Saul's face reddened slightly as he concentrated on the next cut. "You are." The fourth chain came free with less resistance, but the final two restraints were different. They were fused directly into the floor plating, their anchor points melted into the ship's superstructure. Saul couldn't cut them without risking massive structural damage to the chamber, and possibly killing them both. Instead, he rigged a power coil to overload the locking field, setting it to cascade through the remaining restraints and disrupt their energy matrices. It was dangerous. The feedback could fry Valin's nervous system, or the explosion could bring down the entire section of hull they were standing in. Saul didn't hesitate. He triggered the overload. The explosion rocked the vessel like a giant's hammer. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling, and for a moment the world went white with discharged energy. When the smoke cleared, Valin lay free for the first time in centuries. His limbs twitched as he tried to rise, muscles that hadn't moved in decades struggling to remember their purpose. He managed to lift his head, then his shoulders, before collapsing again with a frustrated snarl. Saul moved to him immediately, kneeling beside the great cat's head. Valin's voice, when it came, was soft as falling snow. "Why did you do it? You don't even know me." Saul didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid his arms carefully beneath Valin's shoulders and lifted with a grunt. The guardian was heavier than he looked, solid muscle beneath that ethereal fur, but Saul had hauled plenty of salvage in his time. "You don't leave someone in the dark," he said finally, "if you can carry them into the light." Valin's breath caught. "I remember that. From before. Someone said that to me once, long ago. Smart person. She was my sister." Before Valin's voice broke off, the pain too sharp even for telepathic communication. Together, they limped out of the wreckage into the pale twilight of Marinor 3. Behind them, the tomb lay silent and broken. Ahead, Saul's shelter waited, a humble sanctuary for a broken guardian and a salvager who refused to let beautiful things die alone. But in the depths of space, ancient eyes were turning toward Marinor 3. The chains were broken, but the hunt was just beginning. Healing and enhancement. Saul's outpost wasn't built for guests, especially not for paralyzed alien guardians. The main dome was a patchwork of salvaged hull plating and recycled atmosphere processors, held together by determination and a prayer to whatever gods watched over stubborn loners. But it was warm, and it was safe, and right now that was enough. He brought Valin in through the freight hatch, laying him carefully on a padded sheet of insulation across a steel workbench. The guardian's fur, once luminous as captured starlight, was now dim and matted with blood and debris. His back legs remained dead weight, and even the simplest movement sent tremors of exhaustion through his frame. Saul ran his medical scanner across Valin's body, watching with growing anger as red warning indicators bloomed across the display. The damage was beyond severe, it was surgical. The spinal column wasn't just severed, it had been cauterized with precision, the nerve pathways sealed in a way that preserved life while ensuring complete helplessness. "Precision cruelty," Saul muttered, setting the scanner aside. Valin's mental voice was weak but steady. "They needed me to suffer, not die. They called it, the humbling, a way to break what could not be reprogrammed. Bastards." Saul studied the readouts again, his mind already working through possibilities. "But they made a mistake." "What mistake?" "They left your brain intact. And I'm pretty good with interfaces." For 3 days, Saul worked. He pulled components from the shell of an old combat drone, the targeting AI from a scout ship, and enough neural interface technology to rebuild a cyborg from scratch. Valin rested during the worst of it, his breathing shallow but steady, occasionally sharing fragments of memory through their growing mental connection. Saul learned about the Guardians, an ancient race of protectors who had watched over the galaxy's younger species for millennia. He learned about the Conclave, the shadowy organization that had systematically hunted them down, stealing their knowledge and enslaving their minds. And he learned about Valin's sister, Kira, who had died defending a human colony world that most people had never even heard of. She believed in them, Valin whispered on the second night, his thoughts heavy with grief. Believed that humans were worth saving, even when they didn't know they needed saving. "Smart woman," Saul said, not looking up from his work. "Stubborn, too, I bet. Very stubborn. You remind me of her." On the third night, Saul fitted the prototype. The skeletal frame was ugly, all exposed servos and glowing conduits, but it fit along Valin's spine like it had been made for him. Fiber optic filaments pulsed with low-level power as Saul calibrated each connection, bypassing the damaged nerves and routing commands directly to the muscle groups. "I'm going to try something," Saul said, his hand hovering over the activation switch. "It might hurt like hell." Valin's eyes opened, cold fire glowing in their depths. "I was made of starlight once. Pain is no stranger to me." Saul flicked the switch. The device hummed to life, and Valin's body convulsed as electricity flooded his nervous system. His claws scraped sparks from the metal platform, his jaw clenched against a roar of agony, but then, slowly, incrementally, his hind legs began to move. First a twitch. Then a tremor. Then one leg lifted, wobbled, and held steady for a full 3 seconds before settling back down. Valin let out a sound somewhere between a growl and laughter. "I can feel the ground again." "That's just the start," Saul said, but he was grinning despite himself. "Give it time." By the end of the week, Valin could stand. By the end of the second week, he could walk short distances before the servos overheated and forced him to rest. The mechanical frame wasn't perfect, it was bulky, noisy, and prone to power fluctuations, but it gave him back his freedom. "You've done the impossible," Valin said one evening as they watched Marinor's twin moons rise over the canyon. "Given back what was thought lost forever." "Just stubborn engineering," Saul replied, but there was warmth in his voice. "Besides, I told you, I don't like seeing beautiful things broken." Valin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his mental voice carried a weight that made Saul look up from his repair work. "They're coming." "Who?" "The Conclave. They found us." Valin's enhanced legs whirred softly as he stood, his head tilted toward the sky. 3 ships, running silent. "They'll be here within the hour." Saul set down his tools and reached for his weapon belt. "Then I guess we'd better be ready for them." "Saul." Valin's voice was urgent now. "They don't just want me back. They want you too. What you've built, what you've learned, it makes you dangerous to them." "Good," Saul said, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. "I was getting tired of being harmless." Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in Marinor's darkening sky. Among them, 3 shapes moved with predatory grace, their hulls black as the void between worlds. The hunt had found them at last. But they were no longer the same people who had first met in that crashed tomb. Valin had his strength back, and Saul had found something worth fighting for. The real battle was about to begin. The hunt begins. The first ship landed just after midnight, its hull black as the space between stars. No running lights, no identification beacon, just the soft whisper of repulsors against stone as it settled into the canyon below Saul's outpost. "Hunters," Valin said, his enhanced legs carrying him to the observation window with fluid grace. The mechanical frame had become part of him now, its servos humming in harmony with his movements. 3 ships means they're taking this seriously. Saul checked his equipment one last time. Plasma rifle, emergency kit, the portable fusion cell he used for heavy salvage work. Not much against professional killers, but it would have to do. "What do they want, exactly?" he asked. "Me, first. The technology you built, second." Valin's mental voice was grim. "And you dead, third. You've seen too much, learned too much. They can't risk you sharing what you know. Tough luck for them." Saul shouldered his rifle and headed for the exit. "I've always been a bad risk." They left through the service tunnel, crawling through maintenance shafts that Saul had carved into the canyon wall during his first year on Marinor. The passages were narrow and poorly lit, but they led to concealed exits scattered throughout the rock face. Behind them, the outpost's automated defenses came online, nothing fancy, just proximity mines and a few automated turrets salvaged from dead warships. They wouldn't stop professional hunters, but they might buy some time. "There," Valin whispered, his enhanced senses picking up movement long before Saul's human eyes could spot it. 6 of them. Moving in standard hunting formation. Saul peered through his scope and finally made out the shapes moving through the shadows below. They were humanoid but wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Their faces were hidden behind featureless masks, and they carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. "Modified humans," Valin explained, reading Saul's thoughts. "The Conclave recruits from worlds they've already broken. Loyalty through desperation and surgical enhancement." "Can you?" Saul began, but Valin was already moving. The Guardian dropped from the concealed exit like liquid shadow, his mechanical legs absorbing the impact with barely a sound. The enhanced frame that had seemed so bulky in the confines of the outpost now revealed its true nature, not a crutch, but a weapon system designed by someone who understood both engineering and violence. The first hunter died before he knew Valin was there. Claws that could slice through starship hull found the weak points in his armor with surgical precision. The second managed to raise his weapon before Valin's enhanced leap carried him 15 feet through the air and into the hunter's chest. Saul provided cover fire from above, his plasma rifle painting the canyon in brief, brilliant flashes. The hunters were good, professional, coordinated, lethal, but they'd expected to hunt a crippled guardian and a harmless salvager. They were wrong on both counts. The ship. Valin called out, his frame servos whining as he bounded between cover points. We need to take it before the others arrive. They fought their way down the slope, using the canyon's natural contours for concealment. 2 more hunters fell to Saul's rifle, while Valin's enhanced agility let him strike from angles that shouldn't have been possible. The mechanical frame wasn't just giving him back his mobility, it was making him more than he'd ever been. But as they reached the ship, the real trap revealed itself. Touching reunion, a voice said from the vessel's boarding ramp. The speaker was human, or had been once. Now she stood 7 feet tall, her limbs replaced with polished metal, her face a porcelain mask that reflected the canyon's dim light. The lost guardian and his pet savage. Commander Thex, Valin snarled, his mental voice sharp with recognition. I should have known you'd survive. Survive? The woman laughed, the sound like breaking glass. I've transcended. The conclave showed me what humanity could become when freed from flesh and weakness. She gestured, and more hunters emerged from concealment, a dozen of them, surrounding the small landing area. Just as they'll show your friend here, once we've extracted what he knows about Guardian enhancement. Saul raised his rifle, but there were too many targets. Even with Valin's enhanced abilities, they were outnumbered 6 to 1. You made one mistake, though, Saul said, backing up against the ship's hull. Oh. And what's that? Saul smiled and held up the fusion cell he'd been carrying. The safety was already off, the containment field destabilizing. You assumed I came here to run. The explosion lit up the canyon like a newborn star. The ship's hull cracked, atmosphere venting in a glowing stream, while the hunters scattered like leaves before a hurricane. In the chaos, Valin's enhanced legs carried him clear of the blast radius with Saul clutched in his powerful jaws. They hit the ground rolling, the mechanical frame sparking from impact damage but still functional. Around them, the canyon was filled with the screams of the wounded and the growing roar of the ship's failing systems. That was reckless, Valin observed, setting Saul down carefully. That was tactical. Saul checked his rifle, noting the crack in the stock from the explosion. 2 ships left, and now they know we bite back. Above them, running lights pierced the darkness as the remaining hunter ships moved into attack formation. The real battle was still coming, but they'd sent a message, the Guardian and his human ally weren't going quietly. In the distance, something else was moving through the darkness, larger ships, running silent, approaching from the outer system. Reinforcements, or something else entirely? Only time would tell, but Saul found himself grinning despite the odds. For the first time in 3 years, he had something worth fighting for. And judging by the predatory gleam in Valin's enhanced eyes, the Guardian felt exactly the same way. The hunt was far from over. Final stand. The remaining 2 ships circled overhead like metallic vultures, their searchlights carving through the smoke that still rose from the wreckage below. Saul and Valin had taken shelter in a network of caves that honeycombed the canyon walls, ancient lava tubes that provided cover from orbital bombardment. They're not just hunting us anymore, Valin observed, his enhanced hearing picking up the subtle changes in engine frequency. Those are troop transports. They're bringing an army. Saul checked his ammunition reserves. Not good. The plasma rifle had maybe 20 shots left, and his backup weapons weren't much better. How long until those other ships arrive? What other ships? The ones coming from the outer system. I saw them on the scanner before your friends crashed the party. Valin's eyes narrowed, his consciousness reaching out across the system's electromagnetic spectrum, a skill the enhancement frame had somehow amplified. When he spoke again, his mental voice carried a note of wonder. Those aren't conclave ships. They're old. Very old. Guardian design, but how is that possible? The answer came in the form of a transmission that cut through every frequency simultaneously, a voice speaking in the ancient language of the Guardians, translated automatically by Valin's neural interface. Greetings, little brother. We received your distress call. Kira. Valin's mental voice broke. But you're dead. I felt you die. Death is negotiable when you're made of starlight. The transmission carried warmth and affection across the light years. We've been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Your human friend provided that moment when he broke the chains. Every guardian in the galaxy felt it. Above them, the two hunter ships suddenly found themselves facing opponents they hadn't expected. 3 vessels materialized out of hyperspace, their hulls gleaming with the same ethereal light that flowed through Valin's fur. They were massive, dreadnoughts from the old wars, armed with weapons that could crack planets. The battle was brief and decisive. The hunter ships managed to launch their troops before the Guardian dreadnoughts turned them into expanding clouds of superheated plasma, but it was too late for the Conclave forces. They'd committed to a ground assault against what they thought were helpless prey. Instead, they found themselves facing the last survivors of a race that had once held the darkness at bay. Kira's ship landed in the canyon with the grace of falling snow, its hull shimmering with protective fields. The airlock opened, and she stepped out, a guardian in her prime, unmarked by the centuries of war that had broken her brother. Her fur was the deep blue-black of space itself, marked with silver stripes that seemed to move with their own inner light. Valin emerged from the caves, his mechanical enhancement frame sparking but functional. For a moment, the two guardians simply stared at each other across the rocky ground. Then Kira smiled. You look ridiculous in that contraption. It works, Valin replied, and there was pride in his voice. He built it. Made me whole again. Kira turned her attention to Saul, who had been hanging back uncertainly. Her mental voice, when it touched his mind, was gentle as summer rain. You freed him. More than that, you gave him hope when we thought all hope was lost. I couldn't leave him like that, Saul said. Nobody deserves to be caged. No, Kira agreed. They don't. Which is why we're here. The Conclave troops were still scattered throughout the canyon, regrouping for a final assault that would never come. The Guardian dreadnoughts had locked onto their positions, and Commander Thexa's enhanced form was just wreckage now, scattered across the landing site. But the real victory wasn't in the battle itself, it was in what came after. We've been fighting a shadow war for centuries, Kira explained as her medical team worked to replace Valin's crude enhancement frame with something more elegant. Hiding, running, striking from the darkness. But your signal, the one that went out when the chains broke, it reached every guardian in the galaxy. We're not hiding anymore. What about the Conclave? Saul asked. They built their power on fear and secrecy. Hard to maintain both when your enemies are no longer afraid. Kira's expression grew predatory. We've been mapping their operations for decades. Every slave world, every hidden base, every modified human they've created. They wanted to hunt us. Let them try. 3 days later, Saul stood on the observation deck of Kira's flagship, watching Marinor 3 dwindle to a point of light in the distance. Beside him, Valin moved with fluid grace, his new enhancement frame a thing of beauty rather than crude functionality. It was slimmer, quieter, and somehow more alive than what Saul had built, but the principles were the same. You could stay, Valin said. Join us. We could use someone with your skills. Saul considered it. The Guardians were offering him a chance to be part of something larger than himself, something that mattered on a galactic scale. After 3 years of isolation, it was tempting. But he shook his head. There are other salvage yards. Other people who need help. He grinned. Besides, someone has to keep an eye on the stubborn ones who refuse to ask for it. Valin's laugh was warm in his mind. Like you did for me. Like you did for me, Saul corrected. You gave me something to fight for again. Something worth building. The ship's intercom crackled to life. Attention all passengers. We're approaching the first target system. Conclave stronghold, heavily fortified, approximately 3 million enslaved humans in the processing centers. Kira's voice followed, calm and implacable. Time to remind the galaxy what Guardians do best. Through the viewports, Saul watched the stars align themselves for battle. The war was far from over, but for the first time in centuries, the Guardians were no longer fighting alone. And in the ship's medical bay, human engineers worked alongside Guardian technicians, sharing knowledge that would free thousands more from the chains of the Conclave. Valin had been right, some things were worth fighting for. Some bonds couldn't be broken by any cage, no matter how carefully constructed. In the darkness between stars, hope spread like wildfire. The hunt was over. The liberation had begun. And somewhere in a small transport ship heading back to the Outer Rim, a salvager named Saul Ren smiled as he planned his next project. There were always more chains to break, more cages to open, more beautiful things to pull back from the edge of darkness. After all, you don't leave someone behind if you can carry them into the light. The end.